Hey Buckaroos, welcome back to Musicom Academy. Today something really neat and different. We're going to talk to some friends of mine who I've known for upwards of 30 years. And they all have been PDs, at the local level, which has been great, at different kind of stations, different formats. We're running the gamut here, which is awesome. And which is really different and unique with them is that they've all had national positions with the largest, Canadian radio chain, media chain for that matter, in Canada. And they've had particular areas for the country that each of them have been, in charge of. And so, so they really varied thought patterns and varied ways of looking at radio, going one way, local, and then from the corporate level looking down, which is neat. And we're going to talk radio with them. Also, one of the main reasons why I wanted them on was they've started a new business amongst themselves, and they're my buddies. So it's like, okay, well, let's have them on, expose this to everybody who's watching around the world. And, and let's find out what they do. And hopefully you go like, hey, I can use them. So let me start introducing everybody. So at the top right is Rob Farina. Rob was a national PD a bunch of times, great PD on local level. And also you were involved in the music business in LA for a while, which is, a definite departure from radio, although related. Mike Bendixen, who's on the bottom left. Mike worked for me when I first met him like 20 years ago now, Mike. Mike was a morning show producer, a really great morning show producer that on a news talk radio station that turned into, also being a PD in Montreal, big news talk radio station there. And then back to news talk station back in Toronto, again, big station, and then handling news talk coast to coast for Bell Media, which is, it's a nice heavy title. Mike, did you ever think that 15, 20 years ago that we would ever be talking on a YouTube channel?
No.
I know. No. It's so weird where life takes you. It is like really bizarre.
Yes. I was happy just to be able to say hi to you in the hallways at the time. I was very intimidated by you, but
really?
Of course. Are you kidding me? Yeah, all those illusions have gone away, Pat. I know you for real now, so it's fine.
Okay, cool. Yeah. And last but not least, on the bottom right of your screen is Rob Basile. Hopefully I got that pronunciation right, Rob. Okay, cool. So Rob has been a PD and actually at a Pride radio station, which is probably appropriate. Is this week Pride Week?
It's Pride Month.
I know it's close, somewhere in there.
Pride Month.
Pride Month, okay, yeah. It's okay. See how much I'm out of it for a lot of things. But we had the programmed that, which would be certainly different, and a bunch of other radio stations, different formats and things, which is great. And then also was handling the syndication, all of it for Bell Media, coast to coast for Canada. So acquiring content and then syndicating out to stations. And so he's been on both sides of that spectrum of getting syndication as a PD and then also pushing it out, which is, it's a rare person to talk to. All three of these guys are kind of rare to have them in one spot. Your company is called RMR, Rob, Mike, Rob Media, RMR Media. And roughly, what are you guys doing right now? Like, what's the tact of the company?
I'll jump in first. In the simplest terms, we build audience. I think what the three of us bring to the table is really varied but complementary experience in our ability to build audience, turn brands around. With that skill set, we formed this company that really focuses on high-performing talent as well as media and brands that need to reach their potential audience or need to figure out how to build a business around their creation. So we're highly specialized in talent coaching, content strategy, development, in creating monetization strategies. So we bring all those skills to the table. And then it's different depending on who our client is. So, right now we're already working with a bunch of personalities on developing their own vertical, so they own their show and are able to be the captain of their careers. We are also into the content production business where we're starting to produce some content. And we also get hired by media brands to take a look at the entire operation and come to the table with an action plan. You drive audience, reduce costs, increase revenue. We think of ourselves as a boutique agency rooted in audio.
When you're talking about vertical, do you think right now that if you are an air talent on radio, you really have to start looking out for yourself and make room in your life for a podcast, a YouTube thing, some sort of social media thing, so that you can be a standalone? I mean, it just seems to me that that's where the world is going. And if you're in radio, it becomes harder and harder, given cutbacks and things, to know where your life's going to go. You have to be, captain of your own ship and that kind of stuff.
Listen, in my opinion, I think if you're a really good on-air talent, no matter the format, we've always had this saying that no matter where you go, what you do, you're always kind of thinking of, is this something that I could talk about on the air? Is this a bit? Is that something? Is it a story I should look at? Is it something I'm going to talk about tomorrow? Excuse me. And now you don't have to save that content necessarily for tomorrow's show. You whip out your phone and you're like, Instagram photograph, hey, look what I saw, look what I'm doing, look at this person I met, look at this restaurant I'm at, look at this food I'm eating, look at this drink, et cetera, et cetera. And so you're not sitting there saving these bits, for lack of a better term, for your next show. What you're doing is, hopefully, if you're good, is you're constantly feeding your own brand and your own personality through Instagram, through Snapchat, through TikTok, through whatever digital format that may be. And so, most really good on-air personalities are doing that on a regular basis. And they're going to recycle that for their content the next day because it feeds the beast. Hey, did you follow me on Instagram? If you did, you would have seen that yesterday I was out at this restaurant. You should have seen, so-and-so I ran into, blah, blah, blah. And so I think that there's just that opportunity now, Pat, whereas before those digital channels just didn't exist. And so you were literally either making notes in a book or, calling a voicemail and saying, hey, don't forget to do this bit tomorrow. And so the times have changed. And so therefore, a lot of really good on-air talent is just naturally building their own digital profiles. And therefore, they're having brands come directly to them and saying, hey, Pat, I saw you've got a really great social media following. You don't have to, in the old days, you would have to get a hold of Pat Holliday, the program director of Station X, and say, hey, I really like your morning show host. Is there a way that he could represent our brand? Can we talk about an endorsement, et cetera? Now you can literally DM anybody on the planet and say, hi, I'm Mike Bendixen. I own a hockey jersey company, and I would like for you to, endorse my product. Can we chat about what that would look like? And you don't really even have to go through the big corporate monster. And so that's changed a lot of the discussions that are happening, both for on-air talent, for big organizations that, are paying the on-air talent. And it's also causing a lot of kind of upset in the market as well, because now you get to a point where who owns my brand? Do I own my brand? Does the company own my brand? Did the company help build my brand and therefore they are somewhat responsible for the number of followers I have? All of these things. And so it can become very tricky. And that's where we often step in, is talent will come to us and say, can you help manage this for me? Because I have been approached by a brand, but I don't know how to manage it from a corporate perspective. And I really want to do it, but I don't want to lose my job and all of these things. So
I'm glad you went there, because that prompts another question almost immediately, especially with you guys having been in corporate, again, different perspective. When you have somebody who's on the air that's going in that direction and growing in that direction, from your vantage point of what you've seen, what is corporate, how do they look at that generally of what you've seen? Are they like, wow, okay, that's great, it helps the station, or no, we need to shut that down, or that kind of stuff?
I would answer that, Pat, by saying that corporate is really eager to be able to embrace revenue opportunities.
Always, yeah.
Right? On one end, but The challenge becomes that we have sales teams and we'll stick to the radio business. We
Yeah.
have sales teams that are equipped to sell radio, and many teams are now selling radio and television. It's a completely different ecosystem when you're looking at the brand dollars that are flowing out. So the challenge becomes on the corporate structure. I think there is a willingness to support and see if they can drive the revenue and keep a piece of that revenue. Obviously, that's important.
Mm-hmm.
But where it falls apart is on the execution. What happens invariably is that there's brand dollars there, and sometimes the personality isn't able to accept them because their contract or employment arrangement doesn't enable them to do that, nor is there a system picked up that say, hey, if this talent gets a brand deal, we'll support it, and here's how we'll split the revenue. From a revenue standpoint, I think it's highly embraced. From an execution standpoint, through no fault of anybody, just the nature of the beast and how we built it, that's where it kind of falls apart. And that's where a lot of the fractures begin, because personality says, well, I could have earned that amount of extra money and now I can't, which in some respects is fair because an employer is paying you, hopefully a significant rate to deliver a service. And as part of that service, you're representing that brand.
I think Pat, if you don't mind, I think the other challenge, speaking on the radio side of things as well, but traditional media in general faces is that if you have a digital a following, you could literally go to a brand and say, I can give you 25,000 people that have looked at buying cars, red cars of this price range and are interested in leasing versus buying and live within this geographic area and make this much money and all these things, right? Whereas radio comes to the table and says, well, we think we have this many people listening of this particular demographic, but beyond that, we really can't tell you much more. And so it's been a long issue, I think, in my opinion, from a radio sales perspective, is they're getting just steamrolled by data from these online digital outlets where you can target extremely specifically to the exact person that you're trying to reach, and radio is like, well, we don't really have that data because of the nature of the measurement system. And so I think that is also causing and has caused, for the better part of the last decade, I think a lot of uncertainty in the advertising world where digital companies are coming to the table with very specific data, and radio is kind of like, oh, well, we have this very antiquated system where we think we can target people, but truthfully, we're not sure, right?
This is certainly centering around talent and stuff. Let me ask you a really simple question. And again, I've been out of it for a while, so I'm not sure. When you look at Radio Inc. and you look at, say, Fred Jacobs' blog and a bunch of other radio-related things out there, what keeps coming up from people is that it's hard to find radio talent. Let me back that up. It's hard to find talent to be on the radio. But when I sit and look, it's for sure. I look at an enormous amount of YouTube stuff. Oh my God! And there's a monstrous amount of talented kids out there and people who just do amazing things, and certainly podcasts too. From you guys' perspective, just speaking radio for just a minute, did you find it hard to actually get radio talent, or is generally radio looking in the wrong place?
Yeah, it became increasingly hard to find talent. I think a lot of that is self-inflicted. We went through a period in radio where we were heavily relying on voice tracks. We had increased spot loads. We kind of walked back from that cliff, I think, 15 years ago. But it felt like radio was not becoming the sexy industry to be part of. And there was lots of industries that became sexier. So I think we lost a lot of creative people to other mediums. I think there's maybe more talent than ever out there, to answer your question, Pat.
Yeah.
And as an industry, we're not seen as something that's an attractive or potential for long-term growth. And I think that's a tough trend to reverse, but not impossible.
I know, Mike, you probably would have done it, at CFRB, the news talk station for everybody watching. where you're getting somebody who clearly, okay, they're intelligent, they know the subject, they really know, everything that you'd want on one end, but they've never been on the radio, and you got to sort of make them transition so they're not super boring and all that sort of stuff, because there is a performance aspect. There's no doubt. You got to perform when you're on the radio. Was that hard to do that? To get somebody to make that transition, Mike? And I would assume Rob Basile, when you're in a medium market programming and stuff, I would assume you're going to get very green kids, people, whatever. Almost the same thing is going on, although they've got maybe a little bit more head start.
First of all, I think Rob Farina is right 100%. I think a lot of the times there's never been more opportunities to find talent on an easy way, right? Before you'd literally have to hopefully someone would knock on your door, send you a demo tape or an MP3 or whatever. Now, the options are endless because everyone's creating content. The issue, and I found this, and I've had conversations with people on TikTok specifically where I said, hey, you're doing really great things on TikTok. I see your content, because I can see you're very natural and so on and so forth. And towards the end of the conversation, on more than one occasion, I actually said to them, I said, you know what? I'm sorry, you actually don't need us. You're doing just fine on your own. I'd love to have you, but keep doing what you're doing because you don't need radio. And so there was that. And then there were people that were like, oh, wait a minute. I love radio. I listen to it all the time. That's why I got into podcasting, blah, blah, blah. And so they're still super excited by the medium and want to get into it. So there's kind of two camps on that. But when it comes to, finding talent and seeing if they're any good, part of the reason why we at CFRB and at CJAD in Montreal developed kind of these roundtables was it was a short, cheap way for me to figure out, does this person have any gas in the tank? Can they talk for 3 or 4 minutes in a debate style with some really smart other people pushing back at them? And if they were good, then they got to do more roundtables. And if they were really good, maybe they got to, try a Sunday midnight shift. And if they were really good at that, then maybe they got to, try a fill-in shift and so on and so forth. And so, if you set up opportunities within your programming to try people out and test them out, I think that there is opportunities to test them and to try them and to, give them the audience opportunity to hear them and see if they like them.
Somebody comes to you and they've got a podcast and I don't know, let's just make a number up. They have 4,000 subscribers and, and a pretty fair amount of, time, listening or watching or whatever. What do you guys do with that person? So I'm kind of addressing this to somebody who does podcast at the moment, and they're like, well, how do I grow? What do I do? What are they going to do if I come to you guys? What would you do with them?
The first thing we do is kind of a brand review, and when we say a brand review, it's not only the actual content, but it's themselves. It's like, who do they want to be? What's their unique point of view in the marketplace? Who is the audience for that unique point of view? And, how do we monetize that? So we kind of go through that to kind of build brand strategy. We then move into tactical, coaching. How do you train an audience better? Like a lot of the tricks we used on radio, which are not the same in the podcast world, but many hold true on how to attract audience. And then through as we go through that cycle, we start trying to help and bringing partners to the table to bring some money and resources, and then being able to monitor, make adjustments along the way and work with our partners on how to amplify the content.
Would part of that be some sort of a, I'm looking at you, Rob Basile, some sort of a, you guys have sort of an idea that some of these people you can get into syndication in some way. Have you guys given any thought to down the road? I can't think of. I'm trying to think of the network that the guy formed. Jordan Peterson is part of his network.
Ben Shapiro?
Yes, I forget what that thing is called. Yeah, I guess he couldn't get onto other podcasting type sites where there's a whole bunch of them. Just started his own and just started basically syndicating himself, and then others, and grow, and now he's a juggernaut. Really, I think he's probably in the he's probably in the top 10 of all podcasting as a combination type thing. Is that something that you guys are kind of looking down the road to try to do if you can, or is that like, okay, that's a lot to take on?
It's definitely a potential. Right now, we're focused on being in the business of supporting the talent and the brands and
Right.
helping them build their own business, right? So if there's any ownership stake, we only take a minority of it. The question about how big or small the bread box gets, we don't know right now. One of the conversations the conversation the three of us has had many times over is whatever business we think we're in today may completely change in 6 months.
For
Right?
sure. Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
That's already happened to us because one of our first clients that came through the door has absolutely nothing to do with radio or media business, and kind of has us on an entire separate path, which is fantastic because there's new learnings and we're open, Pat, but I wouldn't say that's a main goal right now of what we're setting out to do.
From my perspective of doing this channel, now it's video, so it ends up being a lot more work than just a podcast because you got all the video stuff going, and the editing alone takes days and days just to do that. Where audio, you can whack it up pretty quick. I'm just wondering from your perspective, when somebody is a high-profile air talent doing, like, say, a morning show or something, and they're devoting so much to it, and then they want to do a podcast. Do you find that people are aware of how much it's going to be, or they get surprised, or when they get into it, you're working?
If you're a talent that's currently employed by a broadcaster, chances are you're going to work within those walls to do whatever you want to do.
What does that mean? Explain that, Rob. What do you mean by that?
If you're a Rosin Mocha over at Rogers, chances are Rogers is going to put anything around you they need to make sure that they're handling your podcast and monetizing it and doing that.
I see. Okay, got it. Oh yeah.
So it's a lot different than the people we work with, because the people we work with are not encumbered by a broadcaster or have left the broadcasting business and are looking to figure out the new world. The biggest factor is the amount of work. One of the things we want to be really clear-eyed about before we go into any arrangement is if the talent is willing and displays the ability to do the work, because nobody's going to fight harder for the success, your success, than you are. Mm-hmm. And if somebody doesn't, fully want to embrace the amount of work required to, start the wheels turning, the hope is it gets easier as you build. But in the beginning, I don't think a lot of people are fully aware of how much work that is. But then there's another group of people that don't look at it as work. This is lifestyle for them.
Yeah.
And they are wired to do this.
For sure, the ideal person who, they're not coming to work, they're just playing, but they happen to get paid for it. Yeah. In addition to their brand and all that stuff, which I got, do you help them actually do their show better, kind of like almost sort of assuming a bit of a PD mode where, hey, we've listened to your show, I don't want to say critiquing, but more like coaching to be better and all that sort of stuff. Do you guys do that too?
Yeah, we offer that, formatting the show, casting of the players, character definitions, all that stuff we provide when we're brought in by a media company.
I would think that you guys would be great because of, all of your experience working with people in varied experiences, because I had the sense right around the time when I retired that it was getting harder and harder for younger PDs to actually learn, hence the channel, actually why I did it, harder and harder to actually learn all of the skill sets that's involved to actually be a really good PD, because they're doing too many jobs, and it's hard, and they don't maybe get enough chance to actually fail. So to be able to go to somebody like all of you guys, you're going to get a different type of feedback than someone who's missing pieces of being a PD. I mean, when you were in corporate and overseeing other radio stations, did you get the sense that there was a pretty big spread of knowledge between the PDs, let's say in the chain of okay, wow, this person really knows their stuff. This one knows it. This one, I don't know, and I don't have enough time to really bring them up to speed or that, whatever. Something in that area. I mean, you guys can chime in for whatever your thoughts are.
Pat, first of all, I want to credit you in doing this channel. You've had a legendary career in broadcasting and delivered unbelievable results. But I actually think the most significant thing you're doing is probably what you're doing right now. And the reason I say that is because we, isolated that the role of a PD was becoming an increasing problem in that the knowledge transfer wasn't happening. We came up in a generation of radio where a lot of the management teams were people that were in the radio business that had experience in programming or on air.
Right.
And through them, while it wasn't a perfect cycle, there was a learning. We also had an ecosystem where, you started off the small markets, and if you did well there, then somebody up the chain was either going to hear it by listening to the radio or hear it through the company, and you were going to get your shot to move up to Peterborough. And then after Peterborough, you made a success of that. That doesn't seem to happen a lot. So, one of the things we did, and this, we were well into the planning phase when COVID hit, and Mike and Rob were both involved, as we were forming PDU at Bell. And it was to really address the situation we found that, there is a lack of a full-rounded knowledge of a PD, because a PD is such a complicated, multifaceted job.
Crazy job, yeah.
Crazy job. So what our plan at the time is be able to kind of assess the PDs and figure out what are their absolute strengths and what are the weaknesses. And if they're really strong at something, let's use them as ambassadors to help the other PDs at that. And then let's address, the skill sets where they're weak on and put resources together to address that. All around kind of having the person walk out of those learnings and be a stronger PD. Whether they stay with the company or move to another company, they're now a much stronger performing individual. And in the absence of that, there's very few places to go to really pick up skills.
If I could just jump in real quick, I think if I could give any advice to anyone that's curious about what a PD does, and still that, I think, definition changes. But I think, when I worked, when I was first, got into the business, worked for the Slate family, obviously, Pat, you were there, and others, I had a ton of freedom to be able to try different things within the radio station.
That's a huge one, yeah.
I started out, as an intern in the promotions department. I used to go to movie premieres and put up posters. And then I thought, gee, maybe it'd be interesting to get tape from these people after the movie and say, what'd you think of the movie? And then I could go to we had an entertainment reporter then, and say, hey, here's some feedback from the movie last night in case you want to put it into your report. And they were like, oh, great. And then, I talked to the sports guy and I was like, hey, if there's ever a game that you can't make it to, let me know. I'll go. I'll get tape. And so I had the freedom from management to be able to go out and do all these different things. And I gained, the knowledge of, working in promotions, working in sales, working in, as a talk show host briefly. I knew how to run a board. I knew what it was like to get a reporter on the air at the last minute. I had the great opportunities from the company to say, hey, Mike, there's a tsunami in Sri Lanka. We'd like for you to go with our senior reporter and figure it out. I mean, all these things added up to different, puzzle pieces, if you will, for me, so that when I did become a program director in Montreal, I at least knew in the back of my mind, hey, man, don't fucking tell me that. I've been there before. I've done that job. So don't try and tell me that you couldn't report from there or that you couldn't find a way to get the story. or that the audio, there was no audio or whatever. And I think that is missing for a lot of people these days is go out and get the experience. Like, be curious, go and do things, whether you're getting paid or you're not. And I don't mean that by like, you shouldn't, your time is obviously worth something, but there's no reason why in today's day, you can't go out and be like, hey, let's record something live on the scene from this concert, or let's talk to people as they come out of the theater and, practice it. All of these, like you're doing, I'm sure you had no fucking clue how to edit video when you sat down and did this.
No, not at all.
Right.
Yeah.
But you learned it and you figured it out so that next, if you're sitting down on chatting with someone, you could probably carry a conversation about video editing. And so,
yeah, for sure. Yeah. One of the other things I used to think about it when I used to be just starting out as a jock, and you sort of just alluded to it. You actually are getting paid because if you're working at a place and you're on the low rung and you're learning something, somebody is paying you to go to radio college.
Yes.
Indirectly, you're getting paid. Because if you're outside the station and you're never going to learn anything about when you're inside doing stuff. You're picking up stuff for free.
Yes.
And you just have to have, which is actually, I don't know about everybody else here or everybody watching. The first thing I actually heard about what you just said about all that, Mike, initiative.
Yeah.
It's actually stepping up 100%. and wanting to do it. Like, that's
and there has to be that curiosity factor of.
Yeah.
What is that person over there doing, and how can I learn to do that? And I think the old adage of kind of fake it till you make it actually goes a long way in this business. I remember going to a Raptors game. Bill Stevenson, rest in peace, the great sports director at CFRB, said, Mike, could you go to the opening season practice for the league, for the Raptors? I walk in going, no problem, because I don't know anything about basketball, Pat. Nothing.
Yeah.
The Raptors are new to the city, okay? I walk, and here's one thing, if one piece of advice. What I didn't realize is when the players practice, they don't wear jerseys with their names on it. So now I'm interviewing people and I have no fucking clue who this guy is. And so I would stick my microphone out there. He's dripping sweat down my arm. And then after the scrum, I would literally whisper into the microphone, big, tall dude. He's got a tattoo of, so-and-so on his shoulder. And I would go back to the station and go on the internet and look for a player that this is how I figured it out, because I didn't know that. I didn't want to say, hey, sir, what's your name? I look stupid. Yeah. So these are the kind of fake it till you make it things that you got to just figure out and not go back whining and saying, well, I don't know who these people, like, just do it, get it done and figure it out. And you're going to make mistakes along the way, but at least you learn a whole bunch of like entrepreneurial skill sets as you go.
I thought when I was running the news talk station, even more so than the music stations, although in this day and age, it probably has been there all along and is certainly morphing together because of podcasts and other stuff. But I don't think you could be a good person on a talk station unless you were incredibly curious. Like I used to notice that with Bill Carroll. Or even right now, sometimes doing interviews. Like sometimes I have to kind of, I have to, set up with questions and stuff. And okay, so at least I got some questions I can go to if I'm in a bind. And then just really listen intently and try to, okay, oh, that was interesting. Tell me about that. Yeah. It'd keep rolling with it. But I used to see, the talk guys and good morning show people too, who got people on the phone. Dick Burton was the same way. They could sit and go for 3 hours just nonstop wailing questions at people because they're curious, and and then edit out whatever wasn't okay later on, because their mind just worked that way. Like it almost seems like the more curious you are, the better you can be, as an air talent. I mean, that was my take. I don't know if you would agree with that or not.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. And I think that was one of the things that I, tried to instill on anyone, that whether you're a reporter, a talk show producer, or anything, is to be curious. And also, when you get fed information, to ask yourself, well, is that true? And do we know that to be true? And so, context is extremely important, and I think is lacking in a massive way, both in our news coverage and the talk side of things. And I'll give you a quick example. This is several years ago now, but I remember hearing at the time Summer of Crime and Gun, Summer of Gun, And I remember, many members of the law enforcement saying, well, it's easy to pick up a gun these days. And so I remember sitting in my office and I was talking to a guy that, did a lot of work with street youth and young people. And I said to him, could you get me a gun? And he said, yeah, I think I could. I said, great. I want to assign a reporter. I want to do a story. Everyone's telling me how easy it is to get a gun. Let's go buy a gun. And we did. I mean, we didn't exchange money, but we met in a parking lot, in a big box parking lot. Reporter was there, and a guy opened his trunk and showed a variety of weapons, and we were able to. And so, again, it's a matter of, okay, is this true? If it is, let's figure it out and then bring the context to the audience and say, hey, guess what? We went out and tried to buy a gun, and it's actually true. That big box mall there where you think you're going to Winners, there's a guy in the parking lot selling weapons. And so as long as you become curious and worry about the context surrounding things, I think that you have a better chance of being a successful on-air talent, as opposed to, oh, well, someone tells me something and I'll just take it as gospel and move forward. That's lacking big time in media.
Oh my God, that's so prevalent right now that you never know what to believe. It's like, well, that says A and this says B, and I don't know if either one of these things are right. Because they spin this one really, really well. Oh, that sounds good. Same thing over here. That sounds logical. I don't, which one? Yeah. Which one is it? Let me. You just tweaked me on something else that I always wanted to ask somebody, and I got 3 PDs here, so I'm just really curious, and we'll take it one by one. What would you guys do? Something happens where you, as a radio station, in something, let's just say culturally, say it's the George Floyd thing, okay? When that happens, okay, or anything where there is a large chunk of the population who is really fired up about it and really into it, and then there's another chunk of the population that maybe sympathizes, but it isn't as fired up with it. Is it safe for a radio station to take a stand one way or the other, or just acknowledge it, talk a little bit about it, in the news area, and stay back, or do you wade into it? That comes up every now and then, and I actually get questions from people writing in on the channel of, well, what do I do about this? Do you think it's good for a music station to wade into it?
Oh, sorry.
Rob, we're 49 minutes in and we're hearing from you for the first time. Come on, man.
Look,
this better be good, buddy.
When you're on a call with people that you have lots of respect for in the industry, you sit back and you listen and you take it in, and that's what I'm doing. So, Rob, go ahead. I have, the one thing I would say is that forget music format. In my opinion, as a programmer, I would forget music format or whatever, and just focus on the cultural relevancy of what's occurring in the marketplace, and that trumps everything. You got to be there for people. And so, I mean, again, we're talking in a very abstract way, so it's difficult to talk about one certain thing. I can bring this back to my experience at Proud FM. We would get hate mail. We would get horrible emails, threatening emails about what we were doing there. That didn't stop what we were doing. There's relevance to our city. Forget about the LGBT community, but beyond that. And so we continued with what we were doing, and that's a responsibility that you have as a broadcaster.
I feel when radio is at its best, we have our finger on the pulse of the community we are serving. Mm-hmm. And if we're not having conversations, showing support on issues that put us on the right side of history, we're not connecting with the audience, especially when your brands like, Virgin Radio is a pop station, but Virgin Radio also has a big brand for inclusion and diversity and self-expression. Those are really important parts of the brand. So when something big happens culturally, I think we do ourselves a disservice by not participating. And listen, it's not always easy to participate. There's times where we've had to fight the headwinds to be able to, have our personalities kind of make comments. I think the George Floyd is actually a really good example. because to me, that was a huge awakening of issues of racism and hidden racism, and their conversations that wouldn't have happened unless we provided a safe space to our audience and our teams to be able to have those conversations. I would say also operating in Canada, for the most part, we're a different culture. And I remember being very early on at Chum, increasing some of the stuff we were doing, like participating in Pride, being sponsors of the fashion carriers, AIDS gala and stuff. None of that was really popular. Some segments that thought, should we be doing this? And those are fair questions to have. But at the end of the day, they were the right thing to do. And I would tell you that those things enhanced the brand because we were on the right side of history, mirroring the conversations our audience was having. And us not being able to do that leads to the fundamental problem with radio today. How are we really meaningfully connecting with our audiences?
Mike, your thoughts?
I think the only thing I would say is that, I think there needs to be a level of honesty with all of this stuff. And what I mean by that is, there are many instances of race, if we're talking about George, maybe not the George Floyd specifically, but there are many instances of quote unquote, wrongdoings in our society that happen on a regular basis. And we shouldn't just pay attention to it when it gets to the point of the level of George Floyd. There are many Canadian examples. And I think also we need to be honest with ourselves. And what I mean by that is when to kind of shut up, get out of the way, and let people that are influenced by those things every single day to have the conversation and to help us understand it. I will never understand it. And so I think that radio has an important role to play to say, listen, I don't have the answers to everything. I've never been, treated that way, but I want to be able to open up my forum to allow for those conversations to take place. The other thing that I think becomes actually, Pat, the harder question, and it's easy to figure out when you can jump on the bandwagon, in my opinion, or when you should start talking about it. The trickier part is, when do you stop? And we all saw that specifically with COVID. We saw a massive amount of fatigue that set in way earlier than I think anyone predicted when we saw that. Mind you, there were other factors in terms of people not commuting, et cetera, et cetera.
When would that be, Mike? When I'm just curious. When 2 months in, 3 months in?
Oh my God! I think it was 2 weeks in. I think people started to fatigue with it.
Okay. I can totally understand that. Yeah, it's okay, I got it. I understand. I could die.
Right.
Blah blah blah.
And it was everywhere too, right? So it wasn't as though there was just if you go to, radio or news stations, that's what they were talking about. The music stations were talking about it. Your entertainment-based shows were talking about it. You turn on ET and it was how does COVID impact, the film set? And here's Tom Cruise. Everyone was talking about COVID. It wasn't just a news story. It was a life story. And so I think that's why fatigue set in so quickly. And then for us, it was the balance of, well, we have a responsibility to continue to talk about the biggest news story that's hit the planet in our lifetime, end of story, or my lifetime. And when to kind of say, okay, how do we transition into a life of normalcy? And it's a balance, but that's the trickier part to answer your question about when you talk about these things. The trickier part is, how do you transition, not talk about them?
Again, you hear it all the time. You see it all the time read, that younger people are, for the most part, gone from radio, or it's dwindling, so you can say they're gone, even though they're still there, depending on the format, still a decent chunk. But for sure, the younger end is dwindling. Most stations are shooting for for something a little older, where the audience actually is. Do you think that that horse has left the barn and there's sort of no way of getting younger people back in? Or is radio, from just your perspective, just not doing what it would take to get young people in? And let me throw this out along with it, okay? If somehow you hit the lottery, for $40 million and you bought a $20 million radio station, that it's yours, you can do whatever you want with it. Would you take a shot for the young end, or would you go you know what, I'm going to pick out the biggest classic hit station, I'm going to go right at them or whatever, that kind of thing.
Well,
one is hypothetical, the other is like reality. What would you do?
I'll give you my easier answer first, because I've always been a contrarian. So if nobody's targeting youth, then I want to be in the targeting youth.
Good answer. Yeah.
That's completely where I double down. But that's me. So, there's a couple of things to look at. First of all, in just lifestyle. Lifestyle was, lifestyle, we had two appliances. We had a television and a radio. We're now bombarded with tons of choices, mostly on the appliance that we're talking to you on and our phone. So the ability to access as easily is no longer there. Then we have about 20 years of, while we've targeted youth, we've always targeted with that 25, 34 audience in mind because the agency dollars are there. We're always being told that 18 to 24 and 12 to 24 in Canada isn't meaningful to win that. So we haven't really targeted in a meaningful way. What's positive is that the fastest rising growth rate on audio consumption is among younger audiences, podcast into most of it. So what that says to me is younger audiences will continue to gravitate to content that mirrors their lives and enriches them. Radio may or may not be the place for them to get that from.
If you were running here's the state of radio, the way it appears to me, you tell me if it's different. Basically, there's a lot of stations with big debt, and expenses keep going up, revenues keep going down little by little. So you're caught in that, and then there's cuts and things in order to kind of at least turn a profit or get close to the being in the black and things. And more it moves toward voice tracking, and then more and more toward networking of some sort. So ultimately, if you own 40 stations, you really are only running 10. And the other 30 are being run out of the first 10. Do you think that's where radio has to go? I'm just curious if again, if you own the thing by yourself, you think that's the right way to go? It's maybe the 100% the correct way to go, given everything around it. All the other media, attacking you from, every single side. Or again, would you be thinking of doing something different, or even ramp that up even more and, come up with a totally different scenario that's basically down the network path type style, kind of like what they do in England, where they rack the whole country from, one place. Here's Heart, all of them, that kind of thing. Tough question. Sorry, guys.
The network strategy has definitely definite validity to it, and it's obviously a strategy that is being utilized by other broadcasters now. I think it's a reality of the beast. The one point of differentiation I would add is right now, when the feeling is the sky is falling, we're making a lot of decisions for the immediate gratification. Mm-hmm. And my challenge has been, and for the last 15 years in our business, is that alongside those, we're not planning for where the new opportunities are. So it's one thing to make plans to have your operation, work more efficiently, but what is the growth plan? And sometimes it doesn't have to be, specifically with radio. With radio, you have a tremendous brand in your market. What are the other ways that brand could be used? Is there an employment fair? Is there, a real estate expo? Is it what are the other things that we can be doing that reinforce our position in the community, allow us to pay our staff and keep the lights on, and start growing some different revenue streams. So not at all to say that those aren't conversations that happen, but often And, and everybody on this line has been to this meeting where somebody walks in and says, we have to cut X amount of dollars out of the budget. Versus the amount of meetings that happen and say, hey, let's look at our business and let's work on a plan to figure out, where we could take it. We need that connection to our local communities. There are less local voices than ever before, so radio's importance in those communities continues to grow, but we definitely have to re-examine what our services in a community and how we extend those to other models that will, build audience and bring new revenue in.
You touch on something that I've thought for a long time, even all the way back to the days in Montreal. It's like, that radio could basically go directly to the public for things, which you're kind of almost alluding on with the so-and-so fair or whatever. You're basically picking up the money yourself, not unlike maybe in a way Rogers with their sports teams. You're using the radio station in a large chunk for another revenue stream. You're an advertising vehicle for this other thing that's making big dough, and you're viewing it as one big pot, which, I don't know if most corporations view it as one big pot as opposed to, there's one division and that's doing great.
Right.
And there's this other division, and we need to cut here. Well, the other one's only doing great because this one's driving it. I've never been in a company where they had that type of stuff going. So I don't know if you've seen that sort of thinking or not,
What you're saying reminds me, a lot of parallels with the music industry in that, if you're a record label recording artist, your main way of making money is album sales. And then hopefully you have a touring business that, there's concert touring revenues. And then merchandising started coming into it. Mm-hmm. Well, now, whereas there being one or two main buckets, there's now 75 buckets where the revenue comes from. There's traditional sales, streaming, brand partnership deals, allowing a company to put cookies to track your fans, and they pay you for that. Wherever it is, there's multiple ways. And I think our business is very much the same, which is really tough on the sales end of it. But I think there's an opportunity for great reinvention there in being able to have salespeople that could sell different products, be they experiential or digital, whatever they may be.
When you were doing that with music artists, and when you were in LA and labels and things like that, how much say did the artist of that have? Because it would seem like if you were Springsteen, you're not going to be looking at the pieces as pieces. You're going to be looking at as a whole, going, this is all coming to me, as opposed to maybe, but maybe I'm 100% wrong, maybe a corporation where they go, this division is doing really well. This one is, I need to cut on this one, even though one is driving the other, and they're all interrelated. It would seem like an artist would see that quicker. Am I wrong on that? I don't know. I'm just.
Artists are generally they are highly talented, creative people.
Sure.
And we've all worked with talented, creative people. And the business is not always the strong point, right? I think it depends on the artist on whether they have that scope of view on the business itself. The more talented the artist, the more they require an infrastructure to solve all those other problems around them. It's the parallel to RMR media strategy is the talent's at the core of any discussion, and it was the same back then with the artists. I mean, literally, they had to drive what the vision was. Because if they weren't going to drive the vision, then it wasn't going to happen.
Yeah, and you don't have any product from that point if they're not in it.
I think the other sorry, Pat. I want to go back to your initial question about local versus syndicated, national, et cetera, and I think everyone in this call is going to agree and kind of roll your eyes when we say, at the end of the day, the content is what matters most, and whether that's local, national, and we see that time and time again. Where, what are we gravitating towards, whether it's on television, traditional, or on social? The most popular shows are not local shows. They're just really good at what they do. With that being said, we're in the business of radio, and local is obviously very important to the vitality of our future. And I think there's never been a better time, an easier time for on-air talent to figure out what local means and what local are talking about. Every community, every street in the city of name it, has a Facebook community group where every person is saying, this is an issue in my neighborhood. This still, well, those are topics for you. That's a point for you to figure out, oh, well, is this something that's bubbling up? Here's my opportunity to be hyper local and talk about whatever those things that are bubbling up on Facebook community groups, TikTok, Instagram, et cetera, et cetera. These things didn't happen before. Back in the day, we actually had reporters and producers assigned to, can you go out and talk to the editors of the local community papers and have them send us stories about what's happening in Etobicoke, whatever. Well, we don't need to do that anymore. It's all digital. Everything exists. And like I said, every other neighbor has their own Facebook community group. So again, it's a matter of using the curiosity, using, your abilities to say, there's got to be more than what I'm being fed on the, top 10 stories that are trending on whatever platform. How else can I dig a little bit deeper? How can I become a little bit more curious? And that's where I think you have a pathway to victory as well, is to say, let's get uber local. And there's never been an easier time to do that. Every Joe Blow around the corner now feels free to video themselves and put it on TikTok. Before, that was a caller to talk radio, right? Now, they're making that content available, so air it on talk radio.
It's funny what you just said, which tweaked me. Again, tell me if I'm wrong. Everything you're saying, 100%, I agree with Mike, for really any station. But I think you get a better chance of executing that on a talk station, because from my vantage point of what it appears to, there's hardly any breaks anymore on a music radio station. Some of them are, okay, that's clearly a liner, and booming, now the person's into the spots. It's got to be incredibly hard to try to work that stuff in, because nobody allows you too much time to talk. Would you agree, disagree, or that's only on some stations? Or I don't know, that's my sense of, here, a little bit less here being Toronto, but certainly driving to Florida, and I'm sure there's a lot more voice tracking going on, and it's just like, wow, nobody's saying anything that's worthwhile. I driving from here to Florida and back, listening to
I think one great thing that, well, selfishly speaking, one thing that I thought Rob Farina did when I worked for him, which was great, was, Rob decided, I'm going to go across the country and meet with all the morning show teams and do like a morning show kind of camp and bring in people to talk to morning show, hosts, because not every market has the opportunity of big budgets and consultants. Anyways. Sure. And so, Rob was nice enough to invite me along and say, because I went to Rob and I said, I really feel like the music stations could learn from talk radio. And Rob said, okay, show me what you're thinking about it. And I presented him a deck and he said, okay, let's do that. And what I meant by that was, I've tried to always kind of approach talk radio. And when I was at CFRB in master control, or in the main studio, there was a big, printed out poster that said, the place where people learn shit. And the reason why I wanted that in the studio was because I wanted you to think every single day, listen, if someone's giving you their valuable time, what nugget are you going to feed them today that's going to make them keep coming back or go, gee, that guy's different than the rest? And in my opinion, the best thing was, can you teach someone something every time they listen to you? And I don't mean teach as in, here's the mathematical equation of X and Y, but, everyone is, talking. And here's the quick example that I gave when Rob and I went on this roadshow was the Raptors had just, were in the playoff run. They whatever that was, 2018, I think. And so we took the idea of, okay, so everyone's talking about, this phrase, we the North. And everyone was saying it's on T-shirts, et cetera, et cetera. And I remember saying to myself, gee, I wonder, where did that come from? Because it seemed rather organic, which would be great. And so I did a little bit of research. It took me all of 5 minutes, thanks to the internet. And what I realized was it was created in a boardroom. And I actually found a copy on Reddit of the guy's notebook and all the different phrases that they had thought of. And one of them was like day north, like everyday north. There was a bunch of them. And then there was, we the North, and it was circled. I swear to God. And so my point is that it took me 5-10 minutes to figure out some of this research, and my point was this is helpful for FM stations to say, hey, coming up next, I bet you don't know where the phrase "we the North" came from. You won't believe It's not organic. It didn't come from Drake, but I'll tell you where it came from. And so if you can feed these nuggets so that when I'm driving with Pat Holliday on a road trip to Florida and go, hey, Pat, any idea where "we the North" came from? And you're like, yeah, it was just kind of came organic. I'm like, nope, here's where. Then you go, shit, where'd you know that? And so these are the types of things that I think if we can deliver this on radio and that doesn't have to be 3-minute conversation, Pat, to your point about music radio. That can be a 30-second thing. You post the image of the Reddit notebook on your socials and say, you don't believe me? Go and look yourself. And so on and so forth. And so that is where I think radio, to a massive degree, is falling flat. And I ask programmers this all the time. I'm like, well, what service are you trying to provide to your audience? Other than music and all that, what is it that's going to make sure that they come back to you every single day? And in my opinion, teaching them, educating them, and I use that in quotes, some nugget of information where I can go, I didn't see that on Facebook. I didn't, whatever. And also, the opportunity has never been greater to weed through all the noise and say to people, by the way, you're going to see a lot of this on your social media. It's not true. That didn't actually happen. Here are the facts. Don't go down that rabbit hole. And I think that's another massive area of opportunity, both on music and talk radio side, because there has never been an era where information just gets thrown out there.
To me, I 100% agree. And actually, John Tesh made a career 100%. Of that with the I didn't know that. I didn't know that. I was like, every break is, I didn't know that. Makes the show interesting. That probably is the cornerstone of a good podcast too. If you're just blah, 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 it's like click, goodbye.
Yeah. I want to jump back to like what Mike was talking about, because one of the smartest things I did was have Mike do his presentation to a bunch of music radio morning shows. I probably got more positive feedback on that one presentation than any other one because he brought in such a fresh perspective. And one of the things that really struck out at me, and Mike is so good at this, is being able to examine a story from every perspective. And this is such a fundamental for any programmer or any talent that's watching or listening to this, is like there is the easy way to digest a story, and usually that's the way it's presented to us, because it's convenient and easy. And what Mike really pushed was the fact, do the circle around the incident. How does this affect and why? And then widen that circle, and through that process, you're able to get, different angles on a story. And while everybody's delivering the same angle, you stick out because you're providing value that's authentic, and it steps out from the way everybody else is delivering that story.
Yeah, Mike, where did you pick that up? If you can remember, was that when you were, producing the morning show, where you kind of have to, get the host to kind of go at it from a million different ways, or was it, along the way as a PD, which goes all the way back to what we were talking about, like in the beginning an hour ago, about all the little pieces that you got to learn along the way as a PD to end up, really doing the job well. Do you remember where you kind of picked that up? Came to?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think I've always kind of been curious as a as a young person trying to figure out what's going on behind the scenes. But I think one moment that stuck out to me clearly was one year the Pope was in Toronto for a papal visit. He was actually staying in a place called Strawberry Island up near Aurelia, and so I got to go up because. When I was younger, in my teenage years, I used to teach sailing, and CFRB had a boat back in the day, and they were like, "Oh, right, Mike, you should go. You know about boating, right?" I was like, "Yeah, fuck, I'll do that." And so my assignment was to, float outside this island and see if there was going to be any activity. Right? Maybe the Pope's going to go kayaking, which was great.
Obviously like the paparazzi.
Right. And so the first day I floated around, nothing happened, Pat. Zero was going on. You couldn't see. So second morning, I'm walking towards this boat. And I look over, and I see these bubbles coming out of from under the water over on another boat. So I'm like, now I do know, fair enough, I've been around boats. So I go, that's weird. So I walk over, and I see a bunch of OPP divers go. And so I said to myself, that's really strange. And in my head, there's only.
Oh, okay, hang on a second. OPP, for those of you watching,
Sorry.
out of Canada, it's Ontario police.
Provincial
It's a police department.
Yeah, it's like the state police or provincial police. So
Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
I see a police truck, and then I see these bubbles. And so I'm like, okay, I'm not a rocket scientist, but I've been around long enough to go, I think there's divers looking for if there's any explosive devices under this. So I call my program director, Steve Couch, at the time, who everybody knows. I said, Steve, this is going to sound crazy, but I think the Pope is going to go on a boat tour today. He's like, what makes you think that? I go, well, there's bubbles, divers. Call me crazy. He's like, I don't know. Maybe the Pope can't really get around that well. I don't see him getting on a boat. I said, okay, I'm putting it in your ear. I think it's going to happen. Sure enough, 4 hours later, this boat pulls up to the island and the Pope gets on and does a tour because there was a kids camp not too far for disabled children. And he wanted to, go out and bless them. And the kids paddled out to this. Anyway, so we had the exclusive. I still, somewhere in my house, I have the written copy from Broadcast News CP at the time that said the Pope has gone on a boat tour, blah, blah, blah. So that curiosity of me going, wait a minute, why are there bubbles under this boat, led to this great exclusive story. And so ever since then, I've kind of been the guy to go, wait, who's over there and what's going on and why is that happening and so on and so forth. And it just became kind of second nature for me to start poking around and saying, is there something else here and what stories aren't being told and so on and so forth. And so that's where, and to Rob, Rob touched on this as well, as looking at different angles to stories. We and this could a good point of education for people that are on the air, report anyone. We had a tragic story in Ontario recently where a daycare lost a child. I don't know if you heard about this story, but a child went missing, and everyone panicked. Obviously, the whole town panicked, and they went searching for this child, and eventually found him in a well. Obviously, not a great outcome, and so. Obviously, the main story there is, can you imagine the parents, so on and so forth. My head goes to, well, imagine you're the person that found that kid. You're just a volunteer going, sure, I'm going to search around thinking I probably won't find anything. And then you look down this well and see something. What about the people that are working in the daycare? We obviously know that this was a massive mistake, but they've got to own it. They've got to, what are they going through? What are the people that live in the community going? So it's not just about, yes, of course it's about the parents, but it's about everybody else around it as well. And so being able to flesh out those stories and look at it from different angles, I think, again, if you're looking for a point of differentiation when you're broadcasting, is to say, of course the parents, blah, blah, blah. But, would you even volunteer for a search and rescue mission knowing that you could potentially find something that you would never want to find in your life? To me, that's an interesting question.
Who owned the well?
Right.
Because all of a sudden, oh my
God.
Who
pulled the cover off? Was it covered and some guy, pulled it off to inspect it and forgot to put the lid on and
a million different things. Yeah. One last question, and then I'll let you guys go. This has been great. We're really kind of running the gamut here, which is neat. Plus all of that you just said, Mike, to me, I'm going, man, if you're a podcaster or any kind of content deliverer, you would want to be thinking this way no matter what you're doing. And really it's probably just comes down to, I would think, what medium are you on as to how much of it you would share or how small of it you would share. Like if you're in a music station, maybe you can only do so much of it. You're going to have to edit like crazy to get it down. If you have more ability to talk for a longer time, then you can, add more content in. But you got to start with the thing to begin with. And, and that's going to have to come up out of your own head of thinking about, what's the angle here? And what am I going to do? Oh, that. Okay. Edit or not edit. One last thing, which is how different things bring you to different areas. Mike, at the moment, I happen to see by accident, it was Anthony Fury. Anthony Fury is a guy running at the moment to be the mayor of Toronto, which is the third largest city in North America, other than Mexico City. So it's New York, LA, Toronto, then comes Chicago, and maybe even Chicago's less now. Maybe it's Dallas. Anyway, big city. You're part of the guy's campaign. You are now on the inside of politics to some degree. And yet with the news talk station, you've spent 20 years on the outside of politics, dabbling, how to get in a little bit. Now you're the other way. Is it different? What's that like? How's that fly? And all that sort of stuff. Anything like you thought it was going to be, or
a little bit.
Anyway.
A little bit. It's a lot more frustrating than I thought it was going to be, and so just to put a little bit of context into this, when we realized there was going to be an election, I knew immediately in my head this is going to go. I know how this is going to play out, right? Anyone that has any form of former politician experience is going to get put into the top category. And that always drove me nuts when I was, in the news business, because I was like, why do these people get put in that category and not this, business guy or whoever that has great ideas? And so when I found out Anthony Fury was running, we connected, and I said, listen, I think you're going to have a massive uphill battle, because if you aren't part of the conversation, you're not going to be up in the debates. And if you're not in the debates, then you don't have a pathway to victory. And I said, I think I can help you with that, because I've been around long enough. I know a lot of people in the business, and I can probably help get you some traction, but I can also, advocate on your behalf. And so that's part of the reason why I agreed to do it, was the challenge. And the other part was, to your point, Pat, was to learn from behind the other side, to go, what the fuck's going on here? What I found out is, it's far more incestuous, if that's the right term, than I knew it was. And what I mean by that is, there's nothing that happens that, someone's brother's sister's cousin works for that organization, and therefore that's why they're supporting them, or, this person is putting this platform and is getting this amount of attention because, they used to work it here, and all, like, it's not organic at all, if that makes any sense. It's really not. And the other thing is, so a perfect example is, and I'm going to come across as sounding whiny, but I'm not. It's just a fact. Polling, for example. You'll hear a lot about polling, and reporters will go, well, here's the top 6 candidates, and here's their numbers. Well, a lot of on-air people will take that list and go here and repeat it. And what I'm trying to educate people on is, guys, you got to look at the methodology behind this stuff. Because if you're giving an aided response to someone on the phone saying, of these 6 candidates, who would you vote for? Well, then your numbers are already skewed if you haven't included everybody. Or if you have said, are you going to vote? Yes. Who would you vote for? And don't give them any aided responses. So these things actually matter when it comes to polling and information. And I think because newsrooms have been largely cut back so much, there isn't the quote unquote elder statespeople that sit around and say, hey, wait a minute, before we go to air with this, let's check the methodology. What questions did they ask? How many people did they ask? Were the responses aided? If so, did they change the order of the aided responses? Because there's fatigue. If you get, to 8 people, someone's eventually going to go, oh yeah, that person. So my point is that there's a lot more minutia behind it. And I wish that everybody would just look at things again. I go back to the context. What's the context on this information that I'm receiving? And I challenge anybody during any election to watch the evening news, and I guarantee you someone will be making an announcement and no one is there to go, how are you going to do it? How are you going to pay for it? Can you actually do that? Do you have the power to do that? Because half of it is just not tested. And so that's where, you hear someone say, well, I'm going to build 50,000 new affordable homes. Really? Who's going to build that for you? Because there isn't a developer out there that's doing it for free. And as last I checked, the city isn't in the business of developing things. So
yeah. And there's no land. So where's that going to happen? So
it's a nice headline, but it doesn't necessarily translate. So I don't know if I've answered your question. It's very interesting. It's fascinating. It's frustrating. It's all of those things. And of course, our campaign team is very small. The amount of fundraising that it takes to put on one of these things is enormous. And that's the whole other side that no one sees publicly, is the levers that get pulled behind the scenes to go, hey, are you donating to me? Well, if you donate to him, then you got to donate to me. Or someone may have donated too early. you peak too soon. We've called donors and said, hey, are you getting on board? And they're like, sorry, I already gave my money to so-and-so because they were leading in the polls, 3 weeks ago. Wow. You should have waited, man.
It's funny. I got an invitation yesterday, or maybe it came this morning. There is a fundraiser with Jordan Peterson speaking, which obviously you would know, And you and somebody else could go to that thing. And I thought, okay, well, that's cool.
Yeah.
And because I know that he endorsed your guy, and I would think that would have probably been some pretty big air underneath the wings. But maybe not. I mean, Peterson's a huge following, but then maybe it doesn't translate. I don't know. You would know better.
Peterson is translates in the way that you can now get support from people, not necessarily always financially, but volunteers will come out and say, yeah, I'll knock on doors, I'll put up signs, and that type of thing. I'll help spread the word. That's where you get someone that has a massive social media following to say, hey, you should help this guy out. So you get
gigantic.
You get phone calls saying, hey, I'd love to help out. Jordan Peterson told me to help out. What do I do? And you're like, well, can you knock on doors? Can you hand out flyers? That's really where a lot of the support comes from. Financially, it will eventually show up. We'll see, that night. It's a hefty price ticket to go to that. But yeah, I would imagine it's probably going to generate, close to, $250,000 in one night.
All right. Well, great ending. I was curious about that, politics and stuff. I had done that when I was a kid. I think I wrote to you, Mike, when I was in the 60s. I think I was in radio one year, and I was doing a jock show and doing commercials, and I had a mayoral candidate, little town. Hey, can you do my commercials for me? It's like, yeah, sure, Mr. Koenig, no problem. And and then that turned into a million questions of this 17-year-old kid about his campaign. I'm going, I can't believe you're running for mayor, and I'm telling you what to do. It's like, it was bizarre.
I think the other thing, Pat, to relate it back to radio is, there's some radio stations that are giving us, and I don't mean just us, the mayoral campaign, a lot of attention, which is great if I'm sitting on this side. If I was the program director, I would be like, guys, you are talking about this way too much. Nobody gives a shit. The last 2 weeks before is when you turn it up. But so it's a conflict for me, because part of me is like, wants to say to them, guys, you're talking about this campaign way too much. But the other side, my, election side, is saying, yeah, great. I'd love to go on your show for the 5th time this week.
Boy, that's a great way to end it, because that pretty much sums up every PD. Once you're a PD, you're always a PD. Your entire life is, you can't listen to the radio without, I wouldn't have done that. I would have done this. All right. Yeah, it's so funny. Exactly. That's amazing that you'd say that. Yeah. Well, I definitely want to thank you guys for doing this. This has been great. I'm sure that a lot of the younger PDs, and probably almost anybody listening to this, because a lot of this was questions that I would normally get, and you were touching on them, especially for the news talk part stuff, because it's all been about music stations, and it's like, well, I have to answer the news talk type stuff directly to them in emails, because I'm wasn't actually doing lessons on news talk. It's a whole different, as you know, a whole different animal. So this has been great. I thank you very much.
Thanks to you, Pat. Appreciate it. It's great to chat with you. It's great to see you, man. And thanks so much for doing this for everybody. I think it's always a good refresher, even if you've been in the business for 20 years, to hear these kind of things, man.
Hopefully, yeah. And good luck with the business. Yeah, thanks, absolutely, Pat. 100%.
Okay, bye.
Okay, take care, guys.